Well, hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to my BCM Game of the Month. This month's game comes from the first round of the 2012 US Championship, and it was played on the 8th of May 2012 between Hikaru Nakamura and Robert Hess. The US Championship is currently taking place as I record at the St. Louis Chess Club, and we wish them all well with this superb event. Nakamura was white, and this game is actually an interesting example of the Evans Gambit. Still a rare bird in Grandmaster practice. There are various Grandmasters who are willing to embrace openings like the Evans Gambit. Nakamura's one, Nigel Short another. These swashbuckling players deserve our respect. Hess takes the pawn, white plays c3, and now the first slight surprise as black plays a rather antiquated defence to the Evans, the unusual bishop d6. It's a move that was played at Hastings in 1895 by Pillsbury, actually. He played this against Schiffers. But the variation has acquired the name of the Stoneware defence after a couple of players from Boston, Stone and Ware, reintroduced it in the 19th century on a regular basis. It looks like a beginner's move as black blocks in his queenside pieces. But it's really not at all easy to refute, although Nakamura makes it look easy in this game. Black's plan is to simply strong point the pawn at e5. He reckons that if he can keep that pawn entrenched in its central position, then white will not have too much compensation for the pawn that he's gambited. Well, this is arguable. And of course Nakamura comes forward with d4. It's obvious that white's going to get the early initiative in this game, as it takes black so long to get his pieces out. But as I say, this is really not easy. So knight f6. Black's plan could easily be to castle, just to play b6, just to play bishop b7, and carry on. In fact, Hess gets the opportunity to execute this plan in our coming game, but fails to take it, which is quite an interesting turn of events from my perspective. Well, Nakamura plays knight bd2, and one of the main ideas of putting the knight on d2 in this position is to try and reroute that knight to c4 at an appropriate moment. Of course, in order to do that, white's got to retreat the bishop on d3, but if the knight gets to c4, it's going to put pressure on the whole black central position. Just going back to show you that white can't take black's position by storm here, what happens after knight g5? Black must castle and now f4. This looks like a very logical way to attack the black position directly. But in fact here, actually I think black can sacrifice a piece. He can go e takes f4 and just allow white to play e5. This is quite an interesting situation as black's probably got to play knight takes e5 in this position. And then after d takes e5, he should go bishop takes e5. And of course this position's not at all clear. Black has got 4 pawns for the piece in this position. Well, probably white's going to get one of those pawns back. And he can break free with d5 very quickly. It's worth noting, just going back, that queen takes e5 is not as good here. After bishop takes f4, queen c5 check. And now I think queen d4, which should be a little bit better for white. But after bishop takes e5, it's anybody's game. So going back, Nakamura chose knight bd2. And now here's the first point in the game where I would question Hess's choice. He castles. Okay, that move has been played before, but that doesn't make it any better than b6. I mean, I think this is actually the toughest nut to crack in this position. Black is simply going to develop that bishop to b7 and wait in the centre with his king. Now, if white goes through with a plan of rerouting the knight to c4, something like this, bishop d3, well, I think now possibly black can castle. And it's hard for white to claim any definite advantage here. It's a bit surprising. If white goes knight h4 here, let's take a look at this. Black can actually get away with the move g6, amazingly. And if white goes f4, we can take on d4. And if he goes e5, we have bishop c5. Takes on c3 check, takes and then takes on f6. Very interesting position. Just going back to g6, possibly a sterner test of black's resources would be bishop g5. But it's still very unclear. If you run this through the engines, you will see this position is very unclear indeed. So perhaps b6, perhaps in the next game, Hess decides to castle. Not such a bad move. And Nakamura just plays rook to e1, which is the fairly standard move. As I say, white's medium-term hope here is to make some impression on the black central formation. Bishop a3. Well, after the game, this was a move that Nakamura criticised. Black has played other moves in this position, perhaps the best of which is just to continue the strong pointing with rook e8. And if white goes knight f1, there was a recent game from Groningen 2011, admittedly between two low-graded players, where black played queen to f8, white played bishop g5. The whole thing was very unclear. Going back to rook e1, knight a5 has also been played in a high-rated game between Fressinet and Najditch from Nancy in 2011. And, well, after bishop d3, it's not clear what that knight was doing on the side of the board, as Najditch decided to return the knight to c6 immediately. Well, Hess went bishop a3, allowing white to play knight takes e5. Black played knight takes e5. There was a very old game, which is actually worth seeing in its entirety, Luna versus Suarez, Mar del Plata 1967, as it gives us a good indication of white's attacking chances in this position. Queen a3, leaving home to a degree and allowing white to start a vigorous attack. This type of position, as we'll see, is extremely dangerous to black because he's leaving his king side very bare of cover. And in the game Luna versus Suarez, white was able to work up a ferocious attack almost mechanically with f4. Black went queen e7, rook e3. It's so easy for white to shunt pieces into the king side here. And in fact, Suarez was finished off very efficiently indeed here after the beautiful move rook to g6, threatening nothing other than something like knight g5 check and then take on e6. Black took, knight g5 check, decoying the king away. Well, black's got to take it. Not enough compensation. g4. That was it. That's how quickly black could go down. Luna versus Suarez, Mar del Plata, 1967. This tends to suggest the excursion out to a3 is a bit of a time waster. Well, Hess played better than Suarez, as one might expect because he's a strong grandmaster. He went knight takes e5, d takes e5, and then retreated his knight to e8. And white went f4. Now, there was a different way to play the position. White could have taken on a3 here and gone queen b3, just aiming to grip black by virtue of the pawn on e5. I think black should probably keep the queens on here and then hit back with d6. But after queen a3, just seems to me white's a little bit better here. He's got more freedom of movement. But of course, it's nothing, you know, it's special. Black can play bishop e6. Definitely a playable position for black, but I prefer white. Nakamura prefers the immediate f4. Hess seems keen to take on c1. And then he hit back with d6. He's got to do that because otherwise he's never going to be able to get his major pieces coordinated. He's got to get that knight back in the game. Which makes it even more surprising when Nakamura took on d6 that Hess didn't recapture with the knight. He actually took back with the pawn, which surprised me. In fact, I think this move is the source of perhaps his difficulties in the future. He should definitely take back with the knight here. And again, nothing clear. White should retreat his bishop, but where to? If he goes bishop b3, we go bishop e6. And going back, if he goes bishop d3, again we go bishop e6, braving the advance of the pawns, something like this, and then rook a d8. Black is in the game. Possibly Hess didn't do this because he was afraid that Nakamura would avalanche him with the central pawn majority. All the same, I think he should probably have taken with the knight, but he took with the pawn. Knight f3 by Nakamura, and now black logically aims to exchange off bishop for knight on f3. He plays a small intermezzo here, rook c8. Well, black could of course take on f3 straight away, and if he wants to change things with regard to the game, then perhaps an independent move here is Queen C7. Of course, he could also go Rook to C8. And then if Bishop B3, Rook D8, something like this. But White's probably a little bit better here after Queen E3, B6, when he could certainly consider the move E5. Takes, takes. And then White's looking forward perhaps to playing E6. It's not so easy for Black this position. If he goes Queen E7, White can go E6. And going back, if he goes Queen B7, again E6 looks strong. Takes, takes. King H8, Queen E7. Black is getting attacked before he ever gets out of the starting blocks. That's why this position is better for White. But, okay, well, Hess decided to play Rook C8, flicking that move. And then he took on F3. Rook C5. So Black is attempting to erect a dark squared defence. He's aiming to put all his pieces on dark squares to restrain White from playing E5 and excuse me, conduct a defence by these means. However, the plan's slow, and Nakamura takes advantage of this to manoeuvre his pieces into better positions, and he can even hit with E5. Hess took. White took on B7. Of course, the opening up of the position tends to favour White because he's got bishop versus knight. And now Hess played A5. So again, you can see the basis of Black's defence. Queen comes back to E4, pinning the pawn. Knight comes to E6. At least Black got his knight into the game. And now White took on E5. And Black played Rook E8. So Black has got all his pieces in play at the cost of a pawn. It's a bit of a ragged pawn. But it is a pass pawn. And it will have some significance in the coming position, as you'll see, as Nakamura manages to entrench a bishop on D5, which is a really good square. White played Rook D1, Black played Queen C7, so Black's continuing this idea of strong pointing dark squares, and now Nakamura brings his bishop in to D5 and reinforces it with C4. Very good play. Now I think actually Hess really does start to go wrong. He starts to feel the pressure. Possibly there's pressure on the clock, I don't know. He went Queen B1 check and then took on A2. This was definitely a mistaken adventure. In fact, it loses. So if we go back, let's see if we can find a better defence for Black. I mean, one thing that strikes me is that the Black Knight would much rather be on C5 than the Black Rook. So how about retreating the Black Rook in this position? Just with the idea of playing Knight C5. I mean, this seems to be a better way to defend the position. White plays King. And also, let's not forget here that Black has just put White in a pin. White can obviously get out of the pin here, something like this. But after Queen B4, Black definitely has counterplay. I think this would have been a better way for Black to play than what happens in the game. Well, anything's better than that, because Black actually loses in the game. He goes, going back to the game itself, he goes Queen B1 check. He chops the pawn at A2, but perhaps he's overlooked the quite devastating nature of bishop takes E6. I mean, that's just a crushing move. Quite difficult. It's a simple move to finish the game. In a way, perhaps that's why Hess doesn't see it, or perhaps underestimates it. Obviously, Black can't take back with the rook, because that's the end. So he's got to take back with the pawn. And now Nakamura moves in with Rook D7. Queen G6 is obviously the threat, or Rook G3. Rook takes G7, very attractive. Rook G3 check. There will always be a way to finish this with Black's queen at the ends of the earth and the rooks uncoordinated. So that was the final move of the game. And Hess resigned. So it's not often you see an Evans Gambit at the highest level. And so, you know, this was a very interesting game to display. Black's defence, the Stoneware defence, this Bishop D6 move, looks so weird. But it's quite difficult to refute. And it's my impression that Hess missed several defensive opportunities in this interesting game.